Hey there, it's Korinn, 365 Days of Open Heart Living, and I have 2 bonus videos for you. They're very special because I get the opportunity to interview Kevin Niv Farrow, who is the founder of AcuEnergetics. He is the one I trained with on learning the inner breath and the inner smile. He is the one that I learned the light body meditations from as well. He has founded AcuEnergetics, which is an energy healing modality, and it's fascinating. He's phenomenal. I'm really excited to share these with you. So I'm plugging these 2 bonus videos in just after day 60 because in the progression of 365 days of open heart living, we did the first 30 days as the inner breath and then the second 30 days as the inner smile. So now you're getting a chance to kind of hear direct from the man who I learned from. He is a wealth of knowledge, he is a treasure, and I know you're gonna love what you learn from him. I also want to just encourage you to listen to both. So the first one, part 1, we are gonna talk about the inner breath and the inner smile specifically, but part 2 is where we get into the fascinating practices of the light body. Now, all of those meditations, inner breath, inner smile, and the light body meditations, they're all ancient practices. So you'll get to hear and learn and understand how the depth that is in them and kind of their background. And then you'll get to learn from Kevin directly on some tips and some insights of just considering when you are exploring with these things on your own. Be sure to watch both videos and then be sure to go to openheartliving.com where I will offer an in-depth course on the inner breath and on the inner smile that will help to bring you to a new level in having meditation in your life. And while you're there, be sure to also subscribe to my newsletter for upcoming opportunity on learning those light body meditations. I am super excited to talk to you today about the light body practices too, because they are something that they are unique to AcuEnergetics. They are profound. I mean, literally in learning how to do the light body practices, you're learning how to do energy therapy on yourself. You're learning how to open up those energy centers, which then open up flow from the non-physical into the physical that affects the body, the mind, your emotional self, all of it for holistic wellness. So I want to ask you, first of all, you call them the light body practices. What is the light body by your definition?
Well, it's really the whole body's the light body.
Right.
It's just whether it's open and flowing or whether it's not. So traditionally there were a whole bunch of practices, and this is the interesting thing about light body practices is that they basically have 2 purposes. One is stillness, but the other is longevity and health, which is
Nice.
why. So these were the practices that were done in ancient Judaism. So if you look at the idea that there's Methuselah who lived to 800 years old and all these people, these are the sort of practices that they did. And so a lot of stuff, particularly in the Old Testament, there's secrets about light body practices hidden within, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, all the stuff that was written by Moses especially. And also in Taoism, in Buddhism, in Hinduism, there's a whole lot of light body practices tied up in the cosmology and theology of them, if you understand what they're talking about. But basically you've got a system of electrical centers that is like a battery, and it's literally life. And so the more it's open, the more alive and connected you are, because everything connects to everything else. Yeah. So it's this, the whole world is intimately connected through the light body. It's like there's the Gaia principle is true. Everything's interconnected. And so playing around with the light body does a few different things. It helps you to be more still, but it also makes you a whole lot more healthy. And I mean, people are really interested in longevity, but for most people that I see who are interested in longevity, they'd be a lot better off forgetting about their diets and their supplements and becoming more loving and less judgy. And that would really help their longevity because you start to get a lot more open. The actual specific light body practices that I've tried to teach these to people who don't do Acu, and I think it's impossible. And that's a problem. And it's probably why they were really tied up in secrets and stuff like that. And so, if you read a lot of the old texts, they really hide how these practices are described. And I think that's, I mean, I don't agree with that at all. To me, I just make everything available, and I have made these things available to people. But in terms of running, when I've run courses, wherever I've run them, the only people who can actually do them are people who've done Acu, because in Acu you specifically learn, AcuEnergetics, you specifically learn how to feel the spirit or feel the electrical system. And that's the ABC of being able to do the light body practices. So, the light body practices are, they're from everywhere. The other day I taught the three pyramids, which is from Egyptian. I mean, they built the three pyramids based on the battery of the three pyramids in the body.
Wow.
Which was fascinating. But the three people that I taught, one was an Acu practitioner and the other two were practitioner level students. So they all had really, really good skills and they could all do it immediately.
Cool.
So the thing about, once you can actually interact with your energetic system, then you can do those practices. And I mean, it's amazing. Your body's your laboratory.
Say that again?
Your body is your laboratory.
Laboratory. Give that a definition. Oh, laboratory. Sorry. Laboratory.
Laboratory. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Tomato.
Yeah. Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah. So, because it's really interesting just doing like the basic thing where you take the Ming Men Center. I'll show you everybody where this is, sort of at the back of the spine, about in line there. So that center there, which is, if you know acupuncture points, GV4, right? This is the gate to the lower sacral, which is the first of the transformative centers in the body. So if you can just go there and just feel your attention there, what happens is you open the gate to that center. And as soon as you do that, you'll find that if you do it, it's a very interesting thing to do when you can do it properly, because you can sit hunched over like this. And as soon as you go there, I'm just doing this now. So your body just straightens up. And it straightens up because it goes to the sacral, transforms energy, and you get movement up the spine. And so it straightens you out. Mm-hmm. And you go, it's such an interesting thing. So it's I mean, I don't see it. I mean, people say, oh, these esoteric practices. I mean, this is as they're esoteric as a banana. It's just a sort of phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
They grow on trees. You can pick them and eat them, and depending on your particular taste, they taste good or you don't like them. This is this happens with anybody who can do that practice. So if anybody's interested in light body practices, the key is your basics.
Mm-hmm.
It's like there's an ABC to doing it. It's sort of like, reading. You don't actually have to know the alphabet to read, although it does help at some point. But you need to have character recognition. So if you see a word, say blue, and you see that and the pattern of letters, that means that color.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you have pattern recognition. So that's your ABC. You can't read without pattern recognition. You can't do the light body practices without being able to feel energy. But once you can do it, they're all easy.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like and amazing. I mean, I've had people who sort of said, because I've been doing this for a long time,
Yeah.
and people have said, God, don't you get bored with doing the same thing? And it's like, it becomes more amazing the more that you play with it.
Mm.
It's like Eric Clapton, getting back to Eric, one of the guitarists, he loves playing guitar. He loves music. He doesn't love it less because he's been playing it for 50 years. He probably loves it more.
Mm. Great point. Yeah. So in learning the light body meditations, the meditator, there are certain energy centers that they open that are kind of you follow the tree of life. Can you talk a little bit about that detail?
Yeah, there's a bunch of different maps. And so essentially the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil from Genesis are both maps of energy centers in the body. There are other energy centers in the body that interact with those. So there's there's a lot of different energy centers in the body. So what people did was, through mucking around with it, essentially, they discovered that there's this sort of pattern that has a loop, and there's this pattern that has a loop, and they sort of open up different things. And then there's other ones as well, so they're the basic ones that we teach to start with, but there are a whole lot of other ones as well. What that CD series I did years and years ago, basically there's about, I don't know how many, I think there's 7 CDs, and
I think so.
I think altogether there's 20 something practices on them. And the idea of that was really that it was really to make a library of them, because a lot of them have just disappeared. I mean, the light body practices are basically disappeared from view, and nobody knows them. I've hardly ever met anybody who knows anything about them at all. A dear friend of mine who was a Tibetan Lama who used to be the librarian of now the only intact Tibetan library that's around, which is now in India. He was one of the only people that I've ever met who actually knew anything about them. You know, it's like people, although there are sort of fantastic maps in Judaism, most rabbis don't realize that it's actually a practical map of where they are in in the body, although they have the map.
Yes.
There are a few rabbis that now believe me because I've taught them and that, but generally people don't get it, and people, you know, a lot of people know the circulation of the light from qigong, but they don't know how to open it properly.
Mhm.
So they think that what they're doing is opening it, but it isn't. You know, I talked to a qigong teacher years ago who told me he could do the circulation of the light, and I said, "You can't." And he said, "How do you know?" And I said, "You'd be different." And
Ouch.
yeah, and he wasn't very happy, but then I said to him, when you do it, it's just this line that you can feel up your back and down your front, and you can feel that, right? And he said, yeah. And I said, if you can actually open it, it's like profound. It's this, you're in this profound, open, like space. It's not like someone's drawing a line on your arm.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, um,
It's an
so,
experience.
yeah. And so unfortunately, they've sort of, you know, they've been completely forgotten about, or the ones that are sort of still around, people don't understand how to open them properly. So I did the CDs to help people in the future, that there'd be, you know, a library of them, so you wouldn't have to spend 50 years reading. I mean, most people aren't so OCD, you know, to spend their lives reading texts.
Like you.
And yeah, exactly. You know, I think you sort of have to be a bit OCD to really understand anything, because it's sort of like, hi, you can go and do this, and but instead you're like, oh no, this is really fascinating. You know, it's a bit. My kids are really into young Sheldon. I recognize things.
Nice.
Um, but it's really sort of like the thing about the light body. I mean, it's a basic sort of understanding. I mean, this is a really complicated topic because it's so huge. But
Yeah.
just the tree of life is a series of centers that go straight up the body, and it's called the tree of life because it's life. So it's your life force energy. So at the bottom, the lower center is the creation of energy. I mean, you see it in Hinduism. The idea that there are three main gods, Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, is about the three transformation centers in the body. So Brahma, the creator, is the sacral center. So this is where energy transforms into an energy that comes up to the heart, which is the preserver, Vishnu. And the energy in the heart goes to all your organs and your muscles, and that's the chi they talk about in Chinese medicine, right? So it's from the transformation of this energy from the sacral. And then part of this goes upwards to the head center, Shiva, the destroyer of worlds. The destroyer of worlds isn't about destroying the world. It's about destroying your opinions.
Genius.
So it's really, I mean, it's really very, very straightforward. But nobody who's Hindu understands that at all. Because you sort of have to know the way the body works to realize those texts. There's a lot of the old texts in all different religions have a line somewhere that, or that says all true texts are about the body. And you find that in sort of esoteric texts in Buddhism, Judaism, Taoism, because it's true. All true texts are about the body, because they're not about theology or cosmology. They're about practical practice. because who cares what you believe? You can believe this or you can believe that, but if you actually sit down and play around with it and you experience it, you go, if I put my attention there,
Mhm.
then this happens, my body straightens up. It's like, oh, that's very interesting. So then you can start to play around with things and you start to notice that your reactivity becomes less. The way you interact with the world is suddenly, instead of being, oh, Jesus, it's Monday morning now, I've got to go to work. Oh, God's truth. You're getting up and it's like the moment is new.
Mm. Beautiful and fascinating. So I'm wondering if you would share the story of like, how did this happen? Like this, what was your aha moment where it all kind of came together to that your understanding of what the two trees, those texts, how they were actually talking about it being a map of the energetic systems of the body.
Right. Well, I studied Taoism for a little while at uni and then dropped out of uni and went to India and started sort of trying to find out things there. But I really amassed a huge library, and which I still have. I've got a lot of I've got texts from everywhere. I've got Christian texts, Sufi texts, Taoist texts, and so a lot of those texts, a lot of the old ones, especially the Taoist ones, had maps in them. So I understood the Taoist mappings of energy centers of the body, but there was and I'd played around with that quite a bit, so I sort of knew that. But there were a lot of the sort of understandings of them weren't in the texts, and I had some understanding of it, but not a it's interesting when you investigate something by yourself. It's always handy when there's a team of you. And the team exists, but they exist back through history. You just have to find the people who understood it. So I knew where the centers were, or some of them, and I knew that I could open some of them up. I had the ability to do it. But then one day, a whole lot of AcuEnergetics practitioners in Sydney, which was about, I don't know, 20 something of us, hired this big beach house at McMaster's Beach for a weekend. And I'm not a surfer, but a lot of the guys were into surfing. And so people were going surfing or bodyboarding, or we were going to the beach for a weekend. Right? So we go to McMaster's Beach at this huge old beach house, and it rains, totally pouring down the whole weekend. So everybody decided to play cards. I grew up playing cards, but I was taught to play cards like this was serious. This is like playing bridge at 4, right? My grandfather was a real maths genius, and we used to sit around with my mother and my grandparents and my brothers, and we'd play bridge sort of games, and you had to remember what got thrown out. So it was like, no, why did you play that card? No, didn't you notice that like 5 minutes ago, that guy threw out the other jack? Never played that. My experience of playing cards was it wasn't fun. So like, let's play cards. And I'm like, no. And I had a book that I'd been carrying around in my bag for a couple of years, which was a translation of the Zohar, which is one of the Kabbalah texts. And so I went, you guys, this gives me an excuse to sit down and read this. So I started to read it, and I went, wow. And I noticed what they were talking about. I went and got a pen and paper, and I drew this map, and then I went, and then I realized something about the maps actually describing these centers, that they're not saying that they're real, but this is like, you know, objects for meditation or something,
Okay.
usually they say. But the map was like there was one here and et cetera, down the body. And this was sort of the map of the tree of life and stuff like that. And when I looked at it, I also read this rave, and the rave in the Zohar says there is no left in that ancient concealed one. All is right. And because I've got a pretty literal mind, that's always translated as left, as in sinistra.
Yeah.
So when they say there's no left, everybody understands it to mean there's no evil in that ancient, you know, awareness, you know, all is good. And to me, I went, oh, you can't see the left-hand side, so you must be looking at it from the right-hand side, from that side. So if you move the body that way and you look at the map, it's identical to the Taoist maps.
That's so insane how that just like bloop came in,
Yeah.
like the right combination of knowledge you already had, the space to like sit and like look at it, and then it was just, you just knew. And that is the basis for all of the light body meditations that you teach, is that.
Yeah, because because in Judaism, there's the interesting thing in Taoism, because they have Qigong, there's some understanding of some practices, but there's no understanding left because it was an oral tradition
Okay.
of what any of the centers meant. So that's all disappeared. But in Judaism, they don't have any practical tradition at all. They think it's all sort of like contemplation from mind or something. But they had the texts dating back thousands of years. So by being able, I mean, I really sort of started to put it together because I read the text. I knew the practical bit, and then I had the text. So I convinced them. It's what?
It's so fascinating.
It is. I talked to a rabbi who's a friend of mine, and it was really interesting because he thought I was nuts. I met him because I was sort of talking about this, and someone said to me, "Oh, you should meet a rabbi." And I go, like, I know a rabbi. And they said, I live next door to a rabbi. Do you want to meet him? And I was like, yeah, great. So anyway, they set up this meeting. So I went and saw this guy, very funny guy. And I was explaining that the Jewish idea of how Kabbalah works is all wrong, right? He thought I was completely cracked. And he said, look, if you know so much about it, fix my foot, because for 2 years I've been walking on Saturday, Sabbath. I'm walking, about 5 miles to get to the synagogue, and I've had this sort of it's like a nail in my heel, and so every step is painful. And I went, yeah, right. And I just knew exactly what it was. So I said, give me a hand. So anyway, I opened the governing channel from his hand, fixed his foot, took 10 minutes. He was like, then he was prepared to sort of go, okay, well, you know something. So, and after about 3 months of he taught me the basics of Kabbalah, and I treated him. And after about 3 months, he said to me, you're right. You're right about how it works. And I said, yeah, I know. And he said, I didn't possibly think you could be right, because you'd have to be really brilliant to work that out. And I've met brilliant people, and you're not one. And I'm like, yeah. And he said, you just happen to be in the right place at the right time, because who reads Taoism and Kabbalah? He said, I know every Kabbalah scholar in the world. None of them read Taoism. It's just like you just had this and you put it together, and you were just lucky. I was like, however it works.
Yeah.
His wife, I told his wife that story a few years later. She went and beat him up for days. Yeah, he did that.
So funny. So it's a total blending of like the kind
It's
of
not really blending.
understanding. Well, hold on. So like combining the two, like the understanding in Judaic text of kind of like the Omer, practicing the Omer, and then having a physical practice. It's taking the two, taking the conceptual and the practical and knowing that they're the same thing.
Yeah, and they were both in Judaism, and they were both in Taoism, and they were both in Sufism. They were both in early Christianity. They were both in Hinduism, in Buddhism. But now what's happened is usually you've only got the theoretical. You don't have the practical. In some, if you look at I look at some sort of Taoist, Qigong, Nigong, things like that, and they've got some practical skill, but they don't have the theoretical. So they don't know what to practice.
So once you had the map and you understood how it worked, then you just started to develop the light body meditations.
I didn't develop them. They're all ancient meditations. So I just started to realize where they existed in texts.
Wow.
So, and then I just sort of, because they're so hard. I mean, the trouble is when you're reading things that say, the white rabbit sits in the silver moon and stuff like that, no one's going to and so the idea of I didn't make anything up. I just wrote them all down. I mean, there are some things that are really, if you look at, which isn't one of the practices I recorded, but if you look at Genesis, yeah, in the beginning, yeah. So the interesting thing about Genesis is Genesis is a translation. The word is Bereshit in Hebrew. And Bereshit doesn't mean beginning. It means the second beginning, because Bereshit starts with a bet. Alpha, bet is Hebrew. Alpha is the first. Alpha and Omega. Yeah. So Alpha is the first. Bet is the second. So the Bereshit, the book of opening, is the second opening. And that's the second opening. So it says, so if you actually translate that practically, it's a meditation that's very, very well known in all traditions, and it's called navel gazing. So it literally goes, in the beginning, there was the heaven. So you open this center, then you open the crown, heaven, and the earth, you open the base. And then God's an interesting word because we invented the word God. It's not an ancient word at all. The word in all different languages means awareness. Buddha means awareness. The word that Allaha, from where we get God, was because a bunch of Greek theologians didn't understand what awareness was. And because they were Greek and they studied Platonism, they thought it was to do with Plato's idea of the good. So Plato thought that there was this, energy of the good through everything, which is not that different from Judaism, where they say that love was the energy that created the creation. But they didn't understand it in terms of awareness. They just understood it in terms of goodness. So we get this idea of God rather than awareness. So if you go back to awareness, you go, in the beginning, open this center, there's the heaven and the earth, and then awareness looks on the water. Water is this center there, chamber of water below the navel, and brought forth light. That's the only center that's sensitive to photons. And so if you actually do that, then you get light. There are faster ways of doing it, but you can build the reason that people used to do that, and it isn't really, you can affect it by looking with your eyes, but really it's using your feeling sense
Okay.
to
Yep.
do it.
Yep.
And so then you build this up. Yeah. And so you can only get light rising, as the saying goes, because you've freed up the light and because you build it up in the body. It's easier. I mean, women are better at this practice for sure. And I don't mean that one specifically, but all light body practices. Whereas guys sort of have to do more preliminary building up charge.
Interesting. Two of the light body meditations that you do teach, the two trees, the tree of knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life. So they operate individually and stand alone as a practice, but then you also combine them in like the mystic cross and the lightning flash. Can you touch upon kind of how they stand alone, like what you're doing in each of them, and then how the combination stands as a connection and oneness?
Yeah, I mean, just getting back to what I said before, like I didn't make them up, so
Yeah.
I put it down. But I wrote them down after doing them a lot and understanding a bit about them. But essentially, like the mystic cross and the lightning flash, that they're ancient practices, and so but the general drift is this: like the tree of life is literally life, your life force. The tree of knowledge of good and evil means just that you think this thing is good and this thing is bad. So knowledge of good and evil means that you have opinions, which means you're in mind. Yeah. So when you're in mind, you're not in the spirit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So if you look at the Garden of Eden story, great story, fantastic. Basically, what happens is that Adam and Eve eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge and evil, and knowledge of good and evil. So they basically start to have opinions. They go into their mind. And so then they're thrown out of the garden and they can't get back in because the correct translation is the angel with the rotating swords. But in the King James Version, they didn't understand Hebrew very well. So they translated it as the angel with the flaming swords. Maybe they thought it looked better and they didn't understand the real meaning. But the angel with the rotating swords actually means your mind.
Mm.
So you can't get back in. The only reason that you can't get back into the Garden of Eden is because of your mind. There's no other problem. It's just the way that you think. And you think this thing is good and this thing is bad. So when you look at the tree of knowledge of good and evil, it's also called the tree of mind and emotion, because all the things that you hold on to and you go, okay, this thing's really bad, this thing's really good, this thing's tall, this thing's short. You know, you have opinions on everything under the sun. This is beautiful, this is ugly. Yeah. It's like, and you're not just sitting and appreciating what is. They're all holding patterns.
Mm-hmm.
So when you open up the tree of knowledge of good and evil, then if you understand what it's for, rather than just sort of going around the circle, what happens is you start to let go of holding in those things. So different centers hold different emotions. So there's a whole, and I know you know all this, and
Yeah.
but in like a simple one, just as a single example, it's
Okay.
like the throat center is humiliation. So basically, what happens is if you get humiliated or embarrassed and you go red in the face. The reason that you go red in the face is that that blocks. Now, it doesn't block individually. It's from a whole lot of other things that happen. You don't feel recognized, etc., etc. But the pattern of blocking in your body blocks those things. When they start to open up, then suddenly it's like you're not so reactive to your programming.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like you've got programming that you put this little thing in and it's going to go, and you put it in and it just keeps doing the same thing. So, you go, it's like you look at this, you feel embarrassed. You go, and you look at this in terms of people doing public speaking. People do public speaking and they get embarrassed, and they do it again, they get embarrassed. Eventually, people get less embarrassed by sort of immersion therapy. But until this really starts to open up, they might control their embarrassment a bit, but they won't enjoy it. Whereas if this is open, public speaking's a blast because there's a whole lot of people, and it's like acting. You're on a stage and all this energy's coming to you, and it's like, wow, incredible amount of energy. And I don't know whether you've done that. Did we do that in level 3 there? Put someone out in the front of the room and have everyone look at them, and then
Probably.
and then you get everyone to look at the floor or turn away, and then look back, and you can feel the wave. It's a physical wave of energy attention to people, and that's why people, that wave, you grab. So when this starts to open, then suddenly you're more comfortable in all different aspects of your life. So when you start to open that up, then you start to be more, be easier in the world.
That's such a truth, because the more you do the practices and you do them the way they're meant to be practiced, it definitely changes you, changes how you live your life. It changes how you view things, changes your interactions, and just day to day, even with yourself. It's just, they are really profound. Thank you for recording them and making them available. I know I listen to them on iTunes. I think you can find them on Spotify and whatnot. And you have also written a book, Meditation as Medicine. I want to, which is a great practical guide available on Amazon. I want to read a quote of yours from it and then have you just kind of talk about it, because it's a fascinating quote. There's so much about you that's just fascinates me and always has. But this quote says, "Your body is your mind in 3 dimensions." That is just, it's wild to think about. Your body is your mind in 3 dimensions.
Well, I think this is one of the problems that we have in terms of understanding, is that we have, as a society, separated body, mind, and spirit into 3 different things. And it's like, so, there's something wrong with we're starting to get these things together. Spirit, forget about, because people don't understand it. It really is the life. So let's chuck spirit out and just go with mind and emotions and body, right? But basically, people are now starting to understand that stress affects your health. Now, even 20 years ago, this was anathema in Western medicine. People were talking about stress. It's like, there's no such thing. I remember talking to a doctor 20 years ago who was like, the most stressful thing people do is eat. So it's all rubbish. Because if you actually look at what happens in the body when you eat and everything that goes on, that's the most stressful things that happens. And so the idea that people have like emotional stress and all this is just a figment of their imagination. And actually, it's not. What happens is your body, mind, emotions, and your electrical system, your spirit, is all the same system. And it's like water, ice, steam. It's the same thing in a different dimension. But, you know, just as when you put an ice block in a glass of water, it'll melt. Yeah, because part of the same thing. And then you can't differentiate one from the other. Essentially, it's all spirit. It's all electrical at different frequencies. So at one of the frequencies, it's mental. Does that have an effect on the emotional? 100%, because it's part of the same thing. Does it have an effect on your physical? 100%. I mean, look what happens to your belly when you worry. Look what happens to your heart when you're heartbroken. It's like, has somebody gone and smashed you in the chest?
Yeah.
No. Does it hurt? Yep.
Yes. Yeah.
But it isn't because someone's come and gone, okay, I'm going to bruise your heart muscle, thumb, right? It's this thing's happened. It's caused an emotional and a physical response.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the body is the mind and spirit in 3D. If you affect the body, you can affect the mind and emotions. If you affect the mind, you affect the emotions and the body. You affect, you know, it's like everything is part of the same thing. You can't have an emotional effect that isn't physical or mental. You can't have a mental effect that isn't emotional. Can you cut yourself off and compartmentalize yourself? No. It just means that you're really blocked.
Yeah.
It doesn't stop you from the fact that you can't recognize the emotion in something that happens doesn't mean it doesn't have an effect. It just means you're so blocked that you're numb to it.
Absolutely.
So,
Gosh.
you know, it's really sort of starting to, you know, physics is so interesting, you know, because if you look at, you know, the idea that why can you clap your hands together? Because of repelling electrical forces. If you take all the matter in the 8 billion people on the planet, so you get rid of the space between the nucleus and the electrons,
Okay.
the total amount of matter for 8 billion people is the size of a sugar cube, right? So there's nothing that's solid in that at all. It's only electrical.
Got it. I got what you're saying. Yeah. Yeah.
Max Planck, who's a famous theoretical physicist, reckons even that's a lot of bullshit, because actually the electrons are just frequencies. The protons and neutrons are just frequencies. It's all just frequencies. You're just talking about whether they're denser frequencies or not. So this piece of matter doesn't exist at all. But even if you go down the old-fashioned path of there is matter, it's the size of a sugar cube for everybody on the planet.
That's mind-blowing. And I was just reading a quote on the exact same thing last week about how the actual structure of an atom, when you get into it, it's just like an energetic tornado, that there's just wave frequencies and wavelengths. It's not really even anything that is like solid to touch.
The way that we get taught it in schools, where, you know, you've got this building block here and then you've got this thing circling around. I mean, these are all just frequencies.
Yeah.
You know, it's like Tesla said, you know, if you want to understand the world, think about frequency and vibration. It's only frequency and vibration. And so we are frequency and vibration, and mind, body, and spirit are all the same thing in the different phases of the same thing that we experience together in 3 different ways. I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah, it really is.
It's like an orchestra, you know. It's like, you know, the strings over here, and you've got the, you know, woodwinds over here, and the percussion, and it's all going off together. It sounds great. You know, the body's like that.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for all of the wisdom that you've shared with us today, the practical bits and pieces, and just thanks for being you. You are fascinating, you are a joy, and I know that whoever watches this, they are going to learn and gain so much. And again, I just want to encourage people to look you up, AcuEnergetics.com. Do you want to share where else they can find you at, Kevin?
I've got an Instagram page, Kevin Niv Farrow on Instagram. And you might get redirected. I've been told I need a new one because I actually used it a few years ago and then I didn't post anything to it for a few years. And then I started to use it again recently and post a whole bunch of videos to it. And one of the practitioners who actually works in IT told me that the algorithm that governs Instagram hates people who haven't used their accounts for a couple of years and they never send your reels around.
Oh.
They told me I had to start a new one, so maybe I'll have to start a new one. So I'll probably do a redirect on that page in the near future.
But if people go to AcuEnergetics.com, are they able to find those links there too?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. When I get a new one, we'll stick it on AcuEnergetics.
Perfect. Perfect. Is there anything else that you want to share, Kevin? I know you have shared so much and I'm so grateful, but I want to leave the floor open for you to kind of end how you would like to.
I really think the most important thing is don't take it seriously and practice.
Perfect. Thank you so very, very much.
Thank you. Thank you.